Let's move on to something more positive in this episode. Let's talk about the new Brainstorm album, Plague of Rats. Folks, if there's a power metal band out there from Europe that does not sound like anybody else, it's Brainstorm. Brainstorm is a band. They sound more American than European, in my opinion. But I can tell you that I have followed this band for about as long as this show has been around, just like I brought up Iron Savior earlier. And Andy Frank, to me, is an incredible vocalist, super cool dude. I have always had him on my show over the years. I met him on the Brave Words of Bloody Knuckles 6-pack shows that they had here in Cleveland, organized by the guys at Brave Words Bloody Knuckles. Just an incredible group of guys. I had Torsten Elfeld on this show as well to talk about their new album. It's called Plague of Rats, which I think is an outstanding album. And honestly, the last 3 albums, counting this one, are probably some of the band's best material. I think it is the band's best material, but man, they've been very consistent, and they've had some great records. I mean, I remember when I first heard Metis Mortis. I mean, that was the album that really made me love this band. I had the first 2 albums, which didn't have Andy singing on them. I had their records, but Metis Mortis and Ambiguity, those 2 records are phenomenal. But Brainstorm is a much different sounding power metal band. They sound nothing like Halloween or anybody else like that. They've definitely carved out their own sound. They have some like Indian, and when I say Indian, I mean India. A little bit of influence from music from India, sometimes incorporated into their music. And it is, and when I talk about bands from Europe having more of an American, more of a darker sound, they definitely fit that bill. And there aren't many power metal bands from Europe that are like that. I think Mystic Prophecy would probably be the closest I could think of that have kind of that darker power metal sound. Like, they don't sound Gamma Ray or Halloween or Blind Guardian. They don't sound like any of those bands. But Brainstorm has really put out an outstanding record. And to talk about the album and to talk about their producer and a big reason as to why they sound the way that they do, check out this interview clip with Torsten Elfeld from Brainstorm. Welcome, everybody, back to the Metal Command show, and I'm here with Torsten Elfeld of the band Brainstorm, one of the original members, and of course, he does play guitar in the band, and Brainstorm, of course, being a band I have followed since the first record came out. Torsten, it's really nice to talk to you. I've never spoken to you before, but I am really excited to have this conversation. You have a new album out, Plague of Rats, which, again, is another great record in a streak of really good albums. And let's talk about the album and, you know, maybe the theme behind it. It's the songs, when I listen to it, seem to be a little bit related to each other. And maybe you could talk a bit about the album itself and give us some details on it.
Oh, yes, for sure. First of all, thanks for having us. And yeah, Plague of Rats is it's not a concept album. So we're not a concept album band, but as when you write the songs for an album, of course, many stories may connect to each other because of recent happenings that happen in the world. So
Sure.
We're not a concept album band, and one of the main topics is, as you can see on the cover, is like bringing back those Eastern harmonies and stories a little bit,
Right.
which we very much focused on, for example, on the Soul Temptation album.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting you say that because, you know, this record, again, is... I think it's phenomenal. You know, it's something weird. I remember when the other band that he was in, Simforce, kind of broke up. It seemed that the records got a little better. I don't know why that is. Maybe he was able to concentrate on the band a little bit more. But the songwriting on these last 3, or probably the last 4, are probably the 4 best records I think you've done. And just so you know, I followed the band when the first album came out, which was a long time ago. And something happened, with the songwriting on with this band, because I can tell you that, Midnight Ghost blew me out of the water, and it was not what I expected. And then obviously the next two records, including this one, I think are great. And, does something change or, with the songwriting? Because, the band was great. Manus Mortis was like a huge, like, underground cult classic type of record when that came out. That always seemed to be the album where people really ended up getting into you guys. But something in these last three records, man, I think is great. And has anything changed starting starting in 2018? Because I don't know, maybe it's me, but these last 3-4 records have been just amazing.
Yes, absolutely. It's we have absolutely the same opinion. It's not that too many things changed, but after the Scary Creatures album, we changed the producer. Since Midnight Ghost, we are working with Zeeb Leverman.
Mm-hmm.
For the last 3 albums now, Midnight Ghost, Wall of Skulls, and Plague of Rats. And he's a phenomenal guy. And for us, it's something like the 6th band member. So he's so incredibly talented with everything that has to do with music, songwriting, melodies, and he's definitely one of the main reasons for the level up, so to say.
Okay.
Without having to lose our Brainstorm identity. So when we go into the studio, it's, let me say, 90% of the songs are as they are, but the 10% input that Steve gives us to the arrangements,
right?
His input is much more than 10%, But I'm relating to the songwriting stuff. It's exactly the level up I think we need, and the last 3 albums have been, or at least the last 2. Plague of Rats is still coming out February 28th.
Right.
But the last 2 have been one of the most successful albums in the band's career.
First, I'm talking about the new album, and of course, part of the reason the band's sounding the way that they do because of their producer. I think that makes a huge difference, folks. Having a really good producer as like another member of the band really helping you carve your sound is extremely important. I think that's a big reason why this album and the 2 previous to it sound as good as they do. They had some really, really good, they have some really, really good music on this one. They had a guest vocalist on this album who I think is a phenomenal singer. She's from Leaves' Eyes. Alina Sorella. She sings on Your Soul That Lingers in Me. That's the name of the song that she sings on. The album's very, very good. Again, darker sound. I would say there is not a bad song on it. But again, it continues on. Like, if you liked the 2 previous albums, in fact, if you've liked any of their albums, you're going to love this one. I would probably put it in my top 2 or 3 by the band. I'm not 100% sure if it's my favorite album by them, but it's definitely, for me, a 10 out of 10 record. Because ever since I ended up getting my electronic press kit, I have not stopped listening to this record at all. I've listened to it every day since I first heard it back. I think it was somewhere in the beginning of January. So I love the record. I think it's great. It's not that dissimilar from the 2 previous albums. Catchy songs. They have their own sound, which is very rare for bands today. And it feels crazy because I remember when this band first came on the scene, I thought of them as a young band, but they've been around like 27, 28 years now. So a really, really great record, though. A lot of these Indian influences, from India, some of those musical influences are on this record. It's kind of like if you mix like a darker sounding power metal band with some music from a country that most people really aren't taking elements from. That's part of the uniqueness of this album. And, you know, some of the lyrics are also all about mythology in India, stuff like that. Just stuff you don't normally hear bands sing about. This is the first time I actually ever interviewed Torsten. So, you know, definitely a really nice guy. I'd always had Andy on the show. And I'm going to end off this review with one thing that has nothing to do with the album. But they had an album come out called Memorial Roots. I'm going to kind of end it off here in a second. Memorial Roots, I thought musically was a fantastic record. But the production in the mix sounded absolutely terrible. It was like the one disappointing thing for me when I heard that. I heard that and I'm like, man, the songs are great. The album sounds terrible. And it was actually disappointing. When I had gone on the radio show, it actually talked about that. Well, they ended up remixing it and reissuing it, and the album sounds like a million times better. It sounds the way it should have sounded. Well, here's Torsten talking about that because it did bring up the Memorial Roots album. Check out this interview clip from our interview. Check it out. I want to go back and talk about one thing that did happen, and I thought was a very good thing. When you remixed Memorial Roots, you know, remember when that came out? I remember when that album came out, I liked it, but I was disappointed with how it sounded. And then probably seven years later, you remixed it. I remember, and in fact, I remember listening to it, the remixed version of that record, and I was like, you know, I think it was the song "Cross the Line" when he first did the remix, and that, you know, that kind of like just real fast riff in the beginning of the song. I was like, man, they improved this. They remixed this album, improved this. Talk about that, because I remember Memorial Roots did get a lot of bad press when it came out, but I think you more than compensated for that press with the remix and obviously bonus tracks and stuff like that.
Yes, definitely. It's Memorial Roots was kind of it was a hard album to make. Everything was kind of, how can I say that? Kind of, it felt very dark around the band, not because of the band not doing well. So, but
yeah,
we changed to AFM and we had the songs written and they felt great, but we wanted to have a different approach to the sound. We wanted to have more dynamic. And when we did the mix, we felt, well, that's what the album needs. But looking back at it, I think we went a step too far, you know, and people didn't get it. And as people are used to a sound that is very compressed and compensated, not open to dynamics anymore, that's why people didn't get what we tried to express with how we mixed the album, you know. And when you get that kind of feedback, it's not a good decision to say, well, it was a fault and we change it now immediately, because there was a plan behind it, and the plan was just that didn't go well, you know. Mm-hmm. So it of course took some time, and until we found the time to really have time for a real remix, not only a remaster, because the album needed a real remix. And we had so many good songs in addition from that songwriting phase. So we decided to make it a real remix and remaster thing with, I think it was 6 bonus tracks.
Yeah, I had a lot of bonus tracks actually.
And and then all of a sudden, people that hated the original version loved the new version.
Yeah. Yeah, it for me, it was really the sound. The song, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that. The songs on that album are unlike anything I think you guys have ever written before or since then. It was just, it was such a different record, but the songs themselves I thought were well written. It almost felt a lot more progressive, probably more than power metal for me. And that, to me, you know, I remember what I said about the album, aside from the mix not being the greatest for me, I thought the songwriting and the route you went down was really cool, because that album, you kind of evolved in your songwriting from what you were doing before.
Absolutely.
and it was so much different. But then now I listen to the records you're putting out now, and you do still, ever since then, you still have some of that progressiveness in your music ever since that album came out. And I always felt that for me, that was an important record for you guys because it was a progression, from what you were doing in the past. So, but yeah, I loved the remix. I mean, the bonus tracks were really, really cool. And that whole package was great when it came out. And I had almost forgotten about the album a little bit until I read that, back in 2016 that was coming out. And I thought the job that was done, the remix, was great. And I think you really hit a home run, as we say over here, with that. So, but I always thought Memorial Roots was kind of a turning point for the band in the songwriting department in a good way. Yeah. So, I figured I'd bring that up because the other day, before I did this interview, I'm listening to the back catalog and I'm like, man, I forgot this album got remixed. So,
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's great to having had the chance to do that remix. You know, it's of course everything is a question of money, and it was a huge project. To open up all the files and do a real remix, which of course was a financial risk, but we wanted to give the album the sound that it deserves.
Yeah, no,
and we're still very lucky that we did that.
Torsten talking about the Memorial Roots album Brainstorm put out and them remixing it. So all in all, again, Plague of Rats is a 10 out of 10. It's an incredible album. If you like power metal, and if you like the darker edged power metal, that's probably a little more American sounding with a few different elements that most people are not using, this album is for you. Especially if you've heard the band before and you love the last two albums before this. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on the show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified when you have a new video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.